beautiful. Always remember that you're so. Always remember that you're so wonderfully made by God.
6:47 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, heading towards the top of the hour and for a bit beyond, we'll focus on something that might be a bit uncomfortable, the whole question of suicide. World Suicide Prevention Day was observed on Saturday, the 10th of September. It's organized by the International Association for Suicide Prevention and endorsed by WHO, the World Health Organization. The occasion represents a global commitment to focus attention on suicide prevention. The 2022 theme, Creating Hope Through Action. And indeed, tell us more is clinical traumatologist Hanif Benjamin, who's taking the time to join us in studio this morning. Mr. Benjamin, many different angles that we could take in looking at this issue of suicide. How would you like to start our conversation this morning?
Good morning to you and to all the viewers and listeners throughout the world. Suicide continues to be a public health crisis, and more so given the pandemic and what that would have done over the world, really. And so we continue with the conversation about suicide prevention, albeit a day, a month, which in my view, as you know how I feel about that, these things need to be sustained throughout. But no less, I'm here and we're here and we're having the conversation for yet another year. And so it is important for me, at least, to delineate with you in the few minutes that we have, how can we begin to prevent what is? I know the conversation a lot of people have is always, well, if you want to kill yourself, you go kill yourself. Or if she want to die, she will die, which has truth and merit to it. But how can we as practitioners, as government, as the people on a whole, begin to prevent or at least work towards the prevention of suicidality throughout Trinidad and Tobago?
And therefore, what because there are many different ways we can look at it. We were having the conversation before we actually came on air, that it's a criminal offense.
Correct,
to attempt suicide. But I mean, it kind of don't make any sense, to tell you the truth, well, because if I want to kill myself for whatever reason, and I don't succeed the first time and you charge me or you lock me up or whatever, I will still try unless my underlying fundamental issues have been dealt with.
And I like how you ended with the fundamental issues, but we live in a place where punitive action always seems to be the order of the day, where it is easier to take a harsh, oppressive action as opposed to understanding. You see, understanding takes a lot of work, and I don't think that we want to do the work that is required to understand why somebody will get to a place of despair where they no longer see the need to live, but yet we lock them up. Why is it still on the books when for year after year after year we have conferences, we have speeches, we have proclamations, but yet it remains on the book as a crime? And so that is where I really want to start. Why is it, or the thrust of we want to help people away from this, but it remains a crime? So it means for us, are we serious about preventative work? And if we are serious, how difficult it is for 40 parliamentarians or 41 to come together and say, listen, this tomorrow morning will no longer be on the book, full stop. And so we keep treating mental health as a crime. We keep treating it as something that we push to the side. And if we really want to begin, not just suicidality, because I want to be sure to tell people, because you want to kill yourself, that don't really mean that you have a mental illness. And because you have a mental illness, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will have suicide ideation. You can have suicidal thoughts or whatever based on life circumstances, so I want to get that out there. But at the end of the day, a lot of people who try to commit suicide or who commit suicide moved along the mental health spectrum from good health to ill health and then committed suicide. And so we need to begin to act now. And the theme you said is action. Are we acting? Having a conference, a meeting does not equate action. We need to take tangible, real-life steps to get rid of the scourge of suicidality.
What action? What action should be taken? Because as you said correctly, conferences, talk, papers submitted, nice things being said, don't translate into dealing with circumstances where, because as you inferred, People don't be fine and just wake up the next morning wanting to kill themselves. It is a journey, a specific journey of whatever it might be. What sort of actions are we talking about here?
And so a big part of that journey for Zero is also something happened immediately, and because that overwhelmed you and it caused you to go into a panic mode, you can also commit suicide at that juncture. They could not have a indicator before. And so one, education. So it means that we need to educate our children, our parents, everyone as to what this is, what it looks like. Because suicidality, suicide ideation looks differently to different people. You see, and so the first thing I want to talk about is a sustained education program that encompasses mental health and suicidality. Why our children, even younger and younger now, are moving towards suicidal ideation or non-suicidal self-harm, which is the cutting and the icing and these things. Why are we doing that? So we need to educate people. I think when we begin to do that, we are beginning to make people more aware. And the more people are aware, the more the stigma subsides. Because, of course, stigma remains the biggest barrier to mental health treatment, not just in Trinidad and Tobago or the region, but the world. And so if we begin to educate people in a real way that is sustained, not a 2-day or a 1-day scenario, then we are moving the pendulum. You see? And so the other major area is the strengthening of the economic factor. We talk the talk, but do we put the money where the mouth is? And so we talk a lot about having a hotline and a this and a that. But we have seen recently where hotlines were saying, well, we don't have the money to operate on a 24-hour basis. I don't want to not kill myself between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And I should only kill myself between 6 and 8. And there are some hotlines who operate intermittently. And so if we have the people already on the ground doing the work, let us strengthen these organizations so that they can provide a robust 24-hour system where people can feel comforted. And I call, not just one line. You hear from another place that say, well, we have one line. You understand? Give the people the resources that they need to do the work. If we're really serious about you could, call this number, call that number, because we have a lot of people, well, we have hotlines, but is a hotline operating at 100% optimum? And that remains a concern. And so the economic factor behind suicide prevention is really about giving the people the money. But we can't give the people the money if we don't take it serious for Zero. And that remains a major concern.
Why is that? Why is that still? Because we see it happening, not just in our circumstances, but all over the world, especially post-pandemic, where people are coping with many different challenges. And I referenced it last week, an article from a Trinidad and Tobago doctor based in Canada talking about the issues of suicidality in the medical profession.
Of course.
And I know young people who tell me that they went to school in the medical field at Mount Hope, and they know at least 4 people who killed themselves already.
Well, I know many more. Right? Because it's either I am brought in after the fact to deal with the families or right before they try to. So we are now trying to prevent. And so for Zero, it is real. It is real. I have colleagues in America who committed suicide. I have colleagues here who know of people who would have committed suicide.
So, Mr. Benjamin, why is it not being given the attention? Is it that stigma is so strong? Whether it be anything mental health, anything psychiatric, anything psychological, anything suicide, anything depression, we're really not prepared as a society to come out from behind the shadows and deal with these things.
Because for Zero, we glorify physical illness. It is easier for us, easier for a company, for a boss, a supervisor, to be empathetic to a man on a wheelchair who had a heart attack or who have a bust open head and bandage. It is easier for us to be empathetic. However, when we see mental health or interact with mental health, we see lazy people. We see people open the window and take a walk. We don't understand why you can't get up and brush your teeth and bathe because you are depression. That means you're lazy. We are not taking time to understand the disease of the mind. We want to understand the disease of the heart and all these other things. But when it comes to something that we cannot see, we pay less attention to it. And because we have in this country per se a facade of happiness, where we are called a happy place. It's not that we are happy. We drink rum, we party to hide the true pain and hurt that we are going through. And we drinking more rum and partying more because the thrust to feel happier is more, so we use more substances. And so that continues to be the challenge that we are facing.
But Mr. Benjamin, we've all been there to a certain level. I mean, thankfully not to the extent of suicide or self-harm and so on. But I'm sure every single person, we're going to pause at the top of the hour, by the way, and then continue our discussion right after, because I think this is an important discussion that we need to have. But I'm sure every single one of us have woken up on a morning saying, not out of laziness, but I just don't want to get out of the bed this morning.
Correct.
Because you see me, I just feeling this weight on me right now, and I can't really function this morning.
Two things. The World Health Organization said 4 in 5 would experience some form of depression in their life, which is what you're talking about. It is okay for people to go along the physical continuum from good health to ill health, and that is acceptable. But when you go along the continuum in terms of mental health, that is unacceptable, and that is where the challenge comes. Because you can call your boss and say to your boss, I really am feeling the feeling today. I don't know what it is, but I really can't muster the strength to come out of bed. They will get a warning letter. But if you call your boss and put on a croaky voice and say, oh God, boy, I ain't feeling good now, which is exactly what happens. So we go and we get a sick leave that say the flu or whatever, but we can't get a sick leave that says stress or depression. You see, and that is one of the points I will come to, which is access and insurance and the workplace. And so it is easier for the man to fake an illness, a physical illness, because that is easier to explain. When you come to mental health and you really don't know how to explain how you feel, you say, I just feeling, I ain't feeling it today. But we really don't know what we are feeling today. And because there is a difficulty in explaining, which is tied to education, you find that it is still looked upon as laziness and something that we're just trying to pull one over.
I suppose in that sense, and we'll take that break, as I said, in a short while, but I suppose, and I know you want to go in the direction of the insurance and dealing with these issues, but we are going to take that break now as we come up towards 7 o'clock. We are having a discussion with clinical traumatologist Hanif Benjamin in relation to the issues of suicide, talking about in the aftermath of World Suicide Prevention Day, something that maybe we're not entirely comfortable talking about, but as I said, I'm sure every single one of us at some point was that whatever feelings of depression or just not feeling the feeling and needing maybe to have some conversation with somebody. Well, we're going to continue our conversation, but it's now 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago.
Billy Bumper, Billy Bumper, Billy.
3 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago as we continue our conversation with Hanif Benjamin, clinical traumatologist, in relation to the issues surrounding suicide in the time that we have available. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning in studio. You mentioned the reference to insurance and compensation and properly recognizing issues related to suicide and depression as real health issues. What more would you like to add this morning?
You see, Fazil, just like we have the robust health system, we need to create a robust mental health system that integrates itself with health on the whole. We separated too much, right? Right now we work on parallel system. And I know that, there are teams within the Ministry of Health who's trying to integrate, and I commend them for that. But we need to do it faster so that both has its prominence, but we don't see it as separate. And one of the things that I always talk about is the access to mental health treatment, which should form part, in my view, of all health centers in Trinidad and Tobago. And while some health centers may say, well, we have a social worker or we have a psychologist, the question is whether someone can walk off the street and go and receive mental health treatment, or whether those people are for internal purposes, like how I've seen it. So creating access is going to be critical. And creating access, in my view, in our health centers, create a situation where we remove stigma, whereas nobody knows when we all sit down outside what we're here for. And so creating that first line of defense where no one knows what you're there for, help remove the stigma, and in so doing, allow people to come to get that level of help. So we need our social workers in all health centers. We need our psychologists, our clinicians, our mental health practitioners at those places every day, just like a regular clinic. And so when we talk about the overall coverage, people don't seek help because one, the stigma and how they will be viewed. But if we create a scenario where the laws are changed in the first instance, which will then create policy changes along the level, because the insurance industry still uses a medical model for zero, and that is killing us. Right? For example, I am a clinician, but their laws require a psychologist. Mental health have moved years and years, but we're still using 1920 archaic laws to define what is mental health and who should be a prescriptor of mental health services. So again, if we change those policies, then more and more people can come forward and be assured that they can be covered. And in so doing, we are creating a scenario on the job for zero where people can go and get sick leave saying that they are dealing with depression and anxiety, mental health, or stress, and not be said, well, we are covering this. There is nothing in the provision for this. And so it means that our OSH Act, right, and our Mental Health Act in Trinidad need to be 100% overhauled in relation to mental health. And once we begin to do these things, we are going to see where people have more access. The more access they have, they can go to people to get the help. You see, but the barriers for zero, the barriers that in my view are immediate workarounds, are the ones that are stopping people from getting mental health treatment, one, and or dealing with suicidality and suicide ideation. Right? Our public health system, while they deal with mental health, it is not as robust as it ought to be. Because of course the system, you can go to therapy once every 3 months because I'm a clinic date. What happens in the intervening period? You see, you can't give people medication like in Trinidad and not have a supporting therapeutic intervention.
You know, Mr. Benjamin, that's why I wonder if you're really serious about this. Because, when you hear, we have a social worker in the schools. It sounds nice when you say that, but if it's one social worker for 3 or 4 schools, then it's best you have nobody.
Correct. And that is what it works up to. So when people tell me, and people get upset with me when I say these things, because they think, oh, well, we have a social worker, or we have. But it boils down to nothing. If a social worker has to take at least 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they get back to the client who is going through. You see, I tell people, when you're dealing with mental health, it's not you just take an injection and you're okay in 3 to 4 days. When you tell a person come back in 6 weeks, 4 weeks to get an appointment at child guidance, 4 months. I have students who were waiting on psychological, psychoeducation evaluation to help them to get time for the SCA exam that are in Form 1 and 2 and have not received those assessments. And I challenge anybody to tell me otherwise. You see, how can we help our children? How can we help the adults who are going through? And then they can't afford to go to the private system, and the public system is not as robust as it is to help them. Those are things that are critical if we want to see the changes. And so in all of that, what I also want to put forward is create connectedness. We need to connect people. We need to connect people who are living with and dealing with mental health in this country. We are not doing that. And again, I suspect that our churches, most religious communities need to play a greater involvement in mental health as well. However, there's also that religious barrier that prevents people from coming forward, because of course it's a great sin.
Yes.
And you will never see the face of Jesus should you dare commit suicide. And so we have that religious barrier as well, like in so many other things that is causing and sustaining mental health challenges.
It's a very involved topic, but in the few seconds that we have left, I understand the point that you're making about, and that I'm agreeing with you. But even with the religious perspective, and it's the same thing in Islam, suicide is condemned. But surely that doesn't prevent you, if you see a work colleague looking a bit down, just, ask them without any stigma attached to it. You all right? If you are an employer and you know your worker to be diligent, hardworking, they never duck in the work, but for some reason they just seem out of it, rather than look to punish that individual, doesn't it make sense based on their track record to say, look, come now, let me sit down, let me talk in the office a little bit now. What's your story?
And that is in the minority. And that is something that I always point out. The humanistic part of us is lacking badly in this country. The will to care, the will to help. It is easier to ridicule, to laugh, to make fun of. Very few people will dare enter into your territory, right, as to offer that help. And so a big part of mental health and, of course, suicidality is reaching across the aisle to say to a person, you're not alone. And while I may never understand what you are going through, I will be here to support and guide you. And the more we get people, employers, family, to step into that realm, you will realize that from a natural perspective, people will feel more comforted to say, I need help. Can you help me?
Mr. Benjamin, we thank you very much indeed for taking the time to be with us this morning. It's 11 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago. It is another one of those very serious and very involved topics that we just seem to treat as an aside with devastating consequences for so many of us in Trinidad and Tobago and in other parts of the world, even if it doesn't lead ultimately to that very sad situation of suicide. 11 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll be back right after this.
In the world today.